Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dr. Jeff Levine. You're a doctor.
Jeff. Thank you.
You're a doctorate in something.
Yeah.
Lots of doctor stuff behind you.
I'm a legend in my own mind.
In your fancy back screen there.
That's actually my office.
Show us your reality. That's not sitting behind you.
No, I'm not in my office now, but that is my office.
All right. Show us kind of like, take that off and show us like how dirty your room is.
No, that's okay.
Is it like something from a dystopian?
No, it's neat, but I'm in my bedroom hiding from my kids so they don't incessantly interrupt us.
You know that the backdrop thing doesn't actually shield you from the kids coming in, right?
No, but being in my bedroom and with the door locked helps a little bit.
Fair enough. How old are they?
It's 8, 9, and 11.
Okay.
So the lock stops them just for a moment.
What kind of children did you make?
I made 2 boys. One just like me. The other looks just like my wife.
Okay, there's a second Jeff Levine who just entered.
That not me.
Well, I don't know who the hell it is. Who's this other Jeff Levine? Who's that dude?
I just followed a link. Sorry.
Hey, Aaron. That's my partner, Aaron.
I don't know why. I don't know why I got your name.
I didn't know anything about this guy. Who the hell is that? And he's in the woods? What's going on with you people?
I'm multiplying. This is how I look so smart. I have all these people behind me.
I did not mean to intrude this way. I just wanted to watch what you had to say, Jeff.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
Do you want Aaron to show his countenance here on the call, or should we throw him back into the attendant?
He's more than welcome to share the spotlight.
No. It's your deal.
Okay.
I just want to fade into the woodwork.
All right, fade you go.
I'll brag about him when he's off screen.
There. So what the hell does he do?
Aaron is the guy that
Zoom calls. There was supposed
besides
to be
that, when he was working, he invented the scanner, the entire platform that is the basis of this company. So he's kind of important.
He's really the guy. Maybe we took the wrong Jeff Levine off.
I carry his water.
Okay. So how many folks are you? Just the 2 of you, you and Aaron?
No, there's 5 of us now. Okay. So for those who don't know, this here is a scanner. It's an optical scanner that's attached to a Zeiss microscope, and that's built around a platform technology that Aaron invented. That's a new way of white light scanning, and it has some unique capabilities that makes it really interesting for medicine. And so we have Aaron who invented that, and he built that, I don't know, over the last few years, a little bit before he and I met, with this guy, Patrick, who's our hardware developer. And we have a software developer that comes with 20 years of experience building similar software products for imaging and tracking soft tissue in the operating room. And that's Roman Moreau-Gabot. And we also have Andy Stewart is our 5th teammate, and he spent 25 years in the operating room supporting as a sales engineer for surgical navigation systems. That's our team. We just finished another race, so we're looking to add some optoelectrical engineers, some machine vision specialists, and maybe an additional software hardware developer over the next couple of months.
Okay, you said a lot there. It was hard for me to absorb it all. So tell me about what your product is, what precisely it does, and does it replace anything on the market? Is it better than? Is it a completely new category? What did you make there? Okay,
so I think it's easier if I start with what the problem is or the existing workflow in neurosurgery. So we'll limit our conversation today to brain and spine surgery. So brain is kind of the most dramatic example. So we'll even start with that. So patient goes in, he's diagnosed with brain cancer. So for example, they'll do an MRI, and they have this, and the MRI can be turned into a 3D model that will help display exactly where that, we'll call it the diseased tissue in the brain is. And then the surgeons go through this surgical plan where they say, here's how we're going to enter the brain, and we're going to go get that little bit of tumor. And in a perfect world, they get all of the tumor, every little bit of it, and they don't disrupt or cause trauma to any of the surrounding healthy tissue. And that requires really exact imaging and very stable hands. So through this process, I now got this image. Now surgery starts. The day of surgery, the patient is put on a table, and this machine is called the surgical navigation system. This is a Medtronic Stealth Station. And these two cameras over there track the surgeon's tools during surgery. They have little markers, optical markers on them that allows it to track in real time. So in order to track the relative position of the surgeon's tools to the patient's anatomy, which is the whole goal of all of this equipment in the operating room, they begin with the registration process. So you press a button on the Stealth Station and it says, touch here, touch here, touch here. You touch a few places on the patient's face and it says, okay, based on that, I know where the patient's skull is in this imaginary field in front of me. And therefore I can place this preoperative MRI within that, in the right position for you. And it's already off a little bit. There's some registration error, give or take a millimeter or two. Plus, because the head is not in the exact same orientation, the brain is already a little further off on top of that. Then to make matters worse, here's where the real pain comes in. When they open the brain, the skull rather, to treat the brain, the release in pressure causes the brain to change shape. And it actually deflates. It loses fluid over the course of the surgery, where the surface can move as much as an inch in real time. So now when the surgeon takes the tip of his tool and he touches the surface of the brain, his navigation system, instead of showing him on the surface, will show him maybe an inch deep into the brain. So this is a well-known problem. It's documented with safety notifications from the FDA, and surgeons have been aware of this for many years. It is the bane of their existence.
It begs the question, if this is a Medtronic tool, surely they are working on a account for the fact that the brain loses fluid and therefore deflates issue. Yes?
Yeah, so the term for that is anatomic shift or brain shift.
Okay.
In this case. And yes, they've been working on it for many years. They've tried a lot of technologies. They've built models of the brain that if you can, tell it how it deformed, it can recalculate the volume and tell you where that little bit of cancerous tissue has moved to.
All they really had to do was hire Aaron, right?
Well, ultimately, that's kind of where we're headed. So we do have an agreement with them. We are working. They gave us that system, and we're working to integrate our technology into it now.
Okay.
Would
have been cheaper to just hire Aaron.
It would have been, but that's not what I'm shooting for. I'm hoping it costs them an arm and a leg.
Fair enough.
In the end.
That part of the recording for those at Medtronic who watch this later. He was joking, folks.
They know better. I don't think that this could have been built 5 or 6 years ago. I think cameras and software programs and the analytics have really just come along in the last few years for this to even to be a possibility. It's been imagined and something that every navigation system has been working on for really 20 years since these things came out. And they've all tried different things. They've got models. Some people are trying sonograms, which allows you to match up one fuzzy gray image with another fuzzy gray image. But we started this. I'm going to kind of circle back around. Aaron invented this. He met a neuro researcher at a party, and he's like, oh, if you can scan a brain, I would love it if you could tell me exactly where the electrodes are located on epilepsy patients. They place an electrode grid on their brain, and they study the electrical signals from the brain. He goes, but it'd be great if we can know exactly where they are. We'd better locate the tissue. And he took him to see a surgeon at Dell Children's Hospital here in Austin. And he's like, that's cute, but the real problem in brain surgery is brain shift. And that's kind of what set Aaron off on this trail. And after thinking about it a little while, he figured out how he can actually use his ability to collect data, very accurate data on the 3D shape and position of the brain. We're going to use that to update the MRI model that is in that system throughout the procedure. So in the future, when our system is engaged, you will be able to take your tool, touch it to the surface of the brain, and throughout the procedure, it'll be accurate.
I invited the other Jeff Levine, Aaron, onto the call.
Aaron, do you want to add to this? I'm really talking about your story here.
You're doing great.
Well, actually, I have to say, he started with, guy walks into a party and meets a neurosurgeon. I mean, it just sounded like a joke, and I thought maybe you knew the punchline better than me because you lived it.
That's really what it was. We were the
What's
two
your
oldest guys at
background,
this
Aaron?
party.
What is your background, and how'd you get invited to this party? And
I have a I have a PhD in optical sciences and engineering, and I've been working with universities and national labs for a long time on high power lasers and plasma experiments. And I developed this 3D scanning technology in my free time at home as a hobby, on and off,
okay.
for some years. And it ends up being unique and ends up having some advantages for medical scanning.
It also sounds far more cool than the way I waste my time.
It's a tinkerer's world for sure, and now it's amplified in our own workspace, so we're having fun.
I don't know if you have family with a TV or a radio or something on, but I hear some background noise. If that's
Yeah, my wife also has meetings, so
okay, fair enough.
I apologize. I can change these things though.
Okay, I
Yeah,
thought
I'll
it
get that.
was turned on. Okay, so how long ago did you two find one another?
We met in, I think it was early 2017. And at that time, I was trying to build a photogrammetry rig to make 3D models of horses for little kids at horse shows. And
Of course you were.
so that's what I was working on at the time. And I built this hardware rig, and it's 10 poles and 10 cameras on the pole, and you set it up around a horse and they take one simultaneous image. And the idea is we're trying to figure out how to automatically stitch them together, create a model, and print them out. That was, my wife owns a horse farm, so I was looking for something to do with her. So that was what I came up with.
That was a critical piece of data that was missing from this.
Yes. So while working on that, ran into problems, couldn't get things to work. And I also work at this company called Capital Factory here in town as a mentor. And somebody said, oh, I know just the guy that can help you with that problem. He introduced me to Aaron. Aaron came out, very generously came out to my horse farm a couple of times, told me what I'd have to do in order to make this work. And there's a lot more light and flashes and things you can't do around horses. So I said, I'm going to abandon that. And that's when he told me what he was working on in the medical space, and asked me if I'd like to join him. And I was really unsure about doing that. I had no experience in the medical world. All I've heard are horror stories about regulatory challenges and all of these problems. So I really didn't want to, it sounded like it was a lot harder than I felt like working at the time. But over a period
No offense, friends on the call.
What's that?
I say you mean them no offense when you say that working in the industry is a horror show.
This was my opinion prior to actually working in the industry. Because that's what makes the news is, $1 billion wasted on, a drug that didn't come to the market, or how expensive things are. And again, it required a whole skill set, knowledge base that I did not have at the time.
Mm-hmm. What is your background?
I am literally just a serial entrepreneur. I've never had a job since high school. That wasn't my own company. So I've done mail order companies. I've done electronics manufacturing. I made software for call centers. I had the very first real-time online employment screening program. I did financial risk management for credit card companies. I had gyms where I taught Krav Maga, which is an Israeli self-defense program. I was chief combatives officer for the U.S. Army for 2 years. I opened CrossFit gyms. I had a food bar.
You're boring at parties, right?
I for sure am. So I did all those things. And then a couple of years ago, I'd sold the gyms. I kind of aged out of that position. Just too many aches and pains, and became a stay-at-home dad, which I loved. My kids were little at the time, and it was really enjoyable. And me and one of the other dads, they were always on the field trips. He was a hugely successful entrepreneur here in town. And he introduced me to Capital Factory. So then I started getting the itch to do something again there.
How many folks are part of that mentorship program? Would you call it an incubator? And what are your...
It is all of those things. Capital Factory is a co-working space. It is the largest or the most active investor in Texas.
Really, in all of Texas?
in all of Texas. Maybe not by dollar volume, but certainly.
What is your dollar volume, like assets under management, roughly?
Oh, I would have no idea.
Millions? A
Yeah,
billion?
yeah, many millions.
Many millions. Let's go with that.
Many millions.
Okay.
They do hundreds of deals every year.
Wow. Okay.
And
Can
they
you
have an accelerator
call you
program.
up and get some money?
What's that?
Can people on this call who need money call you up and be like,
I am not a good source of money. I struggle like everybody else to.
oh, I don't mean your money, but to approach the factory and see if they are.
If you're in, I believe they limit themselves to Texas. But if anybody would like an intro, I'm very happy to do that. We have just finished another successful raise ourselves, so I've got at least a handful of people I know what they like and invest in, and I'm more than happy to share those connections with anybody.
Well, you've given us a good background. I've been highly entertained. I suspect if I were to ask others to applaud virtually, they would.
Okay.
Where are you in the development of your company? And with all of the talent that we have on the call, what are the next things that you need to get you to that glorious commercialization / fantastic buyout by Medtronic?
Or a competitor. I'm not picky. So right now, like I said, we just recently finished our raise, so we're looking to hire those positions that
Again, what are they? Now that I'm ready.
Optoelectrical engineer,
Engineer.
machine specialist,
What was the second?
machine vision specialist
Okay.
or developer, hardware and software developers.
Okay. I hope Jeff Gable's on the line too, is he? Nope. I told him to come. All right. We'll get you an introduction to Jeff too.
Thanks.
You bet. Go on.
So we had just started our clinical trials before COVID hit, and that put the brakes on those for a while. So we kind of scaled back, and we've been just doing a lot of R&D in the shop, bench testing, upgrading some parts, working on automating some of our analyses. Right now, our product works, and we can go in and we can do some amazing things. Some of it is painstakingly slow and manual. So little by little, we're trying to automate those pieces. We're working diligently to integrate our capabilities with the Stealth Station, so we can, more and more get the doctors in these clinical trials a real true feel of what it can do for them.
Okay.
Mounting it on this is mounted, you can't really see it in the picture, but that's a Zeiss surgical microscope in the background. So little by little, we're improving the mount and the fit and finish between our product and that.
With whom are you conducting the clinical trials?
Our first approved IRB is here in town with St. David's, which is an HCA hospital. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with. And then we just got approved, I don't know when we'll start, but we got our IRB approved at West Virginia University Medical School, and we're in a variety of negotiations at different stations. We had different hospitals at NYU and Boston Children's.
I was also curious to know, are you working with a CRO that's helping you put this together, or are you doing this?
We're doing everything ourselves. We occasionally reach out and get some help. Michelle, who's on the line, has provided some guidance for us. We hire the help we need, but we want to, at least at this early stage, really learn ourselves. From what we understand, we don't need a lot of clinical trials for our first regulatory, or any clinical trials for our first regulatory effort, which is going to be a tool claim. But then after that, we'll probably have to engage some smarter, more experienced people to begin clinical trials for what would be our first, I guess, clinical claim.
Okay. Please continue. And at the same time, I'd like to invite the folks in the audience to ask some questions, or specifically, and this is what I had in mind when I invited Jeff today, I think of this week as kind of a case study, a live case study of company coming to market. And I'm confident that someone on this line is thinking, I wonder if he thought of blank, 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 which is like, oh man, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I'd love to isolate something that you didn't even see coming and, get it in front of you so that you can.
There's nothing more useful to me than shining a light on the roadblocks up ahead. I think our first 6 months of exploring this business was filled with those. We talked to doctors and hospitalists and VCs, and they just raised all kinds of flags, and it took a while to get comfortable with those.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, we have our first candidate in Carrie Mellon, who has a question. Hey, Carrie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Do you have your, oh, my phone thinks I said, hi, Siri. No, I did not.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I have a question. Something that's really fascinated me recently is because of the race relations is I either heard on NPR radio or read that the same spot in the brain when pinpointed that judges your fear of other races or colors is the exact same spot that also tells you how religious you are. And when that spot is pinpointed, you become both less racist and less religious. And I'm sure they came up with that by asking you a series of questions about both things like, hey, would you mind having a neighbor that was, black? And then before they pinpointed it, they asked that same question, and the person all of a sudden said, no, I wouldn't mind. Same thing with religion. So I thought that was so fascinating, but still curious. I want to talk to a neurosurgeon or someone in this field how that works, how you pinpoint that spot, and especially if it's an inch off or a milliliter or whatever, millimeter, whatever it is you said. So can you shed some light on that part of the pinpointing?
Probably not the kind you're looking for. We can tell you where the brain is and what's happening with it, but I am not a neurosurgeon or a neurologist. I can tell you how they would find that, though, is there's called functional MRIs. That can show which parts of your brain become active when you see a certain picture or think about a certain subject. So by putting somebody in one of these machines and showing them pictures, having these conversations, you can probably consistently light up the same region.
And so how do you change that region to affect it? Like, how do you deaden that region or how do you change that region so that you can tell?
I have no business answering this question. I'll do it anyway.
Aaron, can you get her invited to the party?
Yeah, right. What they do in surgery, though, is they do monitor electrical signals, and they do surgery with patients who are alive in the sense that they're conscious. And one thing that is amazing is, when they're scraping cancer away, and actually they suck it out. They're trying to stay away from regions of the brain that are vital to language consciousness. And so what you find out is, boy, they want every millimeter of that cancer. Mm-hmm. And 1 millimeter or 2 can mean a huge difference. So these small regions in the brain, which are responsible for whole lesions, someone's personality, is something that at least demonstrates how every millimeter counts and how you want to balance in brain surgery, being conservative with trying to get every percentage of cancer out, which in the end actually enhances the remaining life of that person. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of regions like that, I think, in the brain, and it's a precarious world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing.
Mark?
Hey, Jeff. We met a while back at the OBI conference.
Yeah, I still have your email.
We'll talk soon.
You bet.
So I got started in neurosurgery way back at Stanford. I developed a ultrasound imaging probe through a burr hole. And we created a stereotactic guided biopsy device using ultrasound, which took less time than putting a frame on and all that stuff. But in the course, my co-inventor is the chief of neurosurgery at UCSF, Mitch Berger, who I'm happy to introduce you to. And I also work with a spine surgeon here. I'm up in Seattle. So if you need more clinical introductions, I'm happy to introduce you to those folks.
Very kind of you. We're taking those slowly. We got a little ahead of ourselves.
So I met the fellow. I think he was at Hopkins, maybe. I just remember I flew back. He's the fellow who developed the stealth station way back.
I should know the name, but I don't.
Yeah, he was a neurosurgeon who got frustrated and stuff like that. So they're ubiquitous. I mean, if you do neurosurgery, you've got a stealth station, basically.
Use one of these machines, and every single one of them has the same problems, the same errors.
Yeah, that's true. So good on you.
Thanks.
Jeff, you of course know this, but you and I conversed, it's been a year and a half ago. It was March of 2019, because you'll recall I recorded the call, which I advise everyone to do. Record your calls, because you never know when you're going to say something smart.
I noticed we didn't get to use that.
No, but I have the transcript. I actually just called it up. And I said, so let me make sure I understand. Brain shift is the problem when it comes to brain surgery. It's not among the biggest problems. It is the biggest problem.
Yes, I absolutely believe that. That is the biggest cause of error between the relationship between the surgeon's tools and the tissue he wants to treat. So that difference gets calculated in the surgeon's head. They literally use their imagination. If you ask any of them, I don't know if this is an industry term, but we've heard more than one surgeon say, when we ask them, well, how do you correct for this 1 inch difference or so, they all go, that's the magic. And what they're referring to is after hundreds of doing these cases, that they finally get good at understanding, based on the sound that they're hearing. You're distracting me with this. Based on, the smell of the burning tissue, the sound of the suction, the resistance against their probe, they can tell if they're hitting, white matter, gray matter, tumor, or scar tissue. And that's, at that point, they're really digging around. And the goal is, at the end of these things, so if you imagine, I've got a tumor that's, let's say a 1 inch circle, a perfect 1 inch circle, and I'm tracking that relative to my tools, but throughout the procedure, the circle is dropping. If the surgeon doesn't exactly, correct in his head for where that's moved to, he's going to leave a little crescent, of cancerous tissue at the bottom, and he's going to remove a crescent on the other side of healthy brain tissue. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about, wanting to preserve all of the brain tissue because we don't really know what it does, that's the key right there. And that is the error that we're hoping to fix. We want to get that down to sub-millimeter accuracy so that the surgeon has confidence in what he's doing. He knows his surgical navigation system is accurate, and he can operate based on what he's actually seeing on screen.
So I put up, for those who prefer to read and for those who are more auditory in nature, I said, let me paraphrase in a sentence. Jeff has something that is appropriate exclusively for use in brain surgery that helps the surgeon extract only the bad tissue. And I know now from what you've said, that's not entirely true. You also use it in spinal surgery.
That is a newer use case for us. Something
is that spine? Is that
aiming for a year and a half ago?
Yes, is that spine tumors only, or for spinal surgery like fusions and stuff?
What we're doing, so much like we track the change in position of the brain, we want to do the same thing for the spine. So if you imagine I open up somebody's back and I need to put a screw into a vertebrae, as soon as I press that drill against a screw, it's going to shift. It's not stable, but it's going to move. And I have maybe a 4.5 millimeter screw that needs to go in a 5.5 millimeter, spot. So accuracy is really important if my angle is off a little bit. And so by tracking changes in the position of the spine during surgery, again, the surgeon uses the same navigation system. So while we could apply to tumors on the spine, the big use case for spine is what we call re-registration, intraoperative re-registration. So maybe a few times a minute, we update, or maybe even a few times a second, depends on the procedure. Update position.
So spine surgeons mostly use fluoroscopy to.
They do.
Do you interface with their C-arms or?
Well, we use the data from the C-arm. So that's CT scan or the X-rays that we get we would rather keep adjusting those and track optically what we're doing. Fluoroscopy has so much radiation that it's bad for the patients. It's bad for the surgeons. Some of them get their dose of radiation. They have a limit for the year, and some of them, if they're busy, 6 months into the year, they've sucked up all the radiation they can, and now they're out of work. Yeah. So our device will allow them to go entirely through the year, and it should be faster. It should be safer. We should have to expose less of the spine. There's a lot of benefits, and that's really tracking rigid tissue like the spine is easier than soft tissue.
It does sound as though, however, that you're going to focus pretty much on brain first, and then we'll get to spine.
You would think so. We started this for brain, and that is still the ultimate goal. However, along the way, in order to accurately track the brain, I need to know where the patient is. So we need to be able to do patient registration. That's our first product. Then we need to track the position of the open cranium. That's bone. So we got to track this rigid tissue. So whether it's the cranium or spine, we need to be able to re-register that throughout the procedure. So that really makes spine likely the first product that will come out, because that capability is a predecessor to tracking brain shift.
Tell me, what do you mean register?
So when at the beginning or earlier when I was talking about the beginning of the procedure, they go through this registration process where you tell
where are you and where are the instruments. Okay.
Yeah, that's patient registration.
That doesn't exist today?
No, that exists. That exists.
You said that has to be the first product, so
well, no, so spine is. Let me start over. Sorry. So we need to be able to do registration ourselves, because we need to know where everything is at the beginning, and then we track its movement.
And now that is a technology that exists today, but not in your company. You've yet to.
No,
it exists in movies when they put that pinpoint ink.
No, it exists now. That's what this machine does.
Okay.
It's using stereography, and it's got an error. So there are problems with registration. We're going to deviate a little bit. So registration, in a best case, the doctor has to repeat this a few times until he gets an acceptable error. So every time he does a registration process, the system says, okay, we're plus or minus 2 millimeters. Doctor says, not good enough, let me redo it. And he does this until he gets a number that he's happy with. I think the requirement is like 1.6 millimeters or better, and it can get a millimeter or so. I believe our system is going to be sub-millimeter every time the first time. So this takes away one pain point in a repeated process that takes time while you possibly have a patient on the table. What makes our product more interesting is throughout the procedure, if I move, somebody bumps into this system, or you readjust the patient's head or the bed, you now have to repeat this process. Stop the surgery, everybody stand back, let's redo this registration, maybe 3 or 4 times before I'm comfortable as a surgeon continuing with the surgery.
Wow. So you're not pinpointing the actual physical brain, you're pinpointing the spot that the brain is in the room?
Yes.
That's wild. And instead of, now if I'm doing something like Trump, which I'm doing, like let's use Clorox in the body, but so you can't actually make a physical mark on the brain itself in that spot and then target to that spot instead of a physical targeting the room as the
you start with the patients, you start with let's call it global or a macro view. And then as you go through the procedure, you want to get more and more micro on it. And our scanner just seamlessly goes from the macro view much more accurately than the existing equipment, right to the micro view. And it's automatic, and it should run on its own without having to stop the surgery when something gets bumped or moved.
Wow. Okay.
So and that's because that does happen in procedures. There's another FDA safety warning that came out there was actually a recall on a couple of products because the machine doesn't know when it's off. And so doctor would look at the machine, continue the procedure thinking it was accurate. So one of the benefits of our machine, because it updates and it's tracking throughout the procedure, is it will know, it should correct itself every time, but it will also know when it's off. right away. So that's something we think we can help with.
Rob, you had a question?
Yep, a quick point of clarification and then some questions. So you've got the MRI, so you have the
Sorry.
3D data.
I meant the Rob who showed up before you on the screen.
Oh, sorry.
Robert
Go ahead.
Packard.
My question was real simple. I was wondering if there was an accepted animal model for the brain shift, or whether you can only do it in living humans.
I'm not aware of animal models. I am aware there's probably half a dozen people around the world, groups that are working on brain models in humans. And they rely on intraoperative MRIs and comparing those when they're used during a surgery with what the navigation said at that kind of same point in time. So that's how they know kind of how far things off. And long before we got into this business, there are people around the world that have built these models. So you asked earlier, Joe, companies must be spending money trying to solve this. They've got models, but they did not have a way to connect these models to the patient in real time. So in other words, I have a brain model, I have the patient's MRI, I can merge the two. We can segment tissue, and then I can tell that model, well, what happens if I press here? Or what happens if I remove fluid? And it will recalculate the entire volume and ideally create a new MRI, a false MRI, and upload that into the system repeatedly throughout the procedure.
Yeah, we want to be clear that there are people who have connected the models with what's going on with patients. It's just not to the fidelity that it's been accepted in the market, and so it's not a real solution yet.
So
Ours would be
as your
a new way.
As your marketing friend, I'm compelled to ask, why should I believe that your fidelity is better than their fidelity? What's your insight? Why should I believe that you've cracked the code?
We do have a unique 3D scanning system, so it's not like it's not like we're reproducing other people's techniques and just doing it better. We're not buying something off the shelf and just aiming it at the brain. We do have unique intellectual property that has advantages for 3D scanning for medicine.
Okay, so again, as I like to dumb things down so my mother-in-law can understand, I just heard you say, yeah, but we have 3D. No one else does?
No, so every company
the emphasis was was supposed to be on the word unique, not not the 3D.
Harder to define and get people excited about, but that's for another call someday.
There are what's called phantoms, which are National Institute of Standards and Testing devices that are measured extremely accurately down to thousandths of a micron. And you can put one in front of our machine and we can scan it and we say this is how big we think it is, and by comparing ours to that versus another company's to that same scan, you'd be able to compare how accurate we are. And so when I mentioned earlier, our first product, our first regulatory effort will be as a tool claim. That will be based on bench tests and software, validation of our software and our technical capabilities. That's the whole point of that first effort, is to prove, to the FDA, at least at the beginning, that based on our bench tests and other validations, that we are as accurate as we say we are.
So Mr. Stuppelbein, I believe now with my limited understanding or improving understanding of your skill set, this is like way what you do.
I think that I could be of help. So I guess I've got a question. So you've got the MRI data. So you got a 3D space of the brain and skull. And then your guys' light technology gives you a real-time feedback of the surface of the brain.
Yes.
Visible.
Yes.
And then with that information, you know that those surfaces have moved compared to what the 3D scan is. But how do you predict material inside the eye, where that moves?
I'll let Aaron answer that.
So we have not generated our own 3D simulation, finite element mesh or otherwise.
Okay.
We are starting collaborations with people who have. There are a few groups around the world that are good at this. And we've managed to attract the attention of at least one of them. Okay. So we hope to just work with them. That complication is is one of the reasons why it's just easier for us to do rigid registration as stepping stones towards hoping to solve or improve the issue of brain shift.
Gotcha. Yeah. So FEA is my specialty.
Awesome.
In biomechanics, that sort of thing.
FEA means?
Finite element analysis. So CAD is geometry. Finite element analysis applies loads to deform parts, kind of nebulously. A suggestion that might be, if on a brain surgery, if you're off by millimeters, it counts a lot. And you've got a fairly deformable part if it's actually moving by a whole inch. I'm used to micron sort of movements or millimeter. Have you looking at breast cancer? Because you've got very large shifts, but if you remove a little bit more material, it's not nearly as catastrophic.
Yeah, there's breast surgery, there's liver surgery. Any soft tissue surgery is where we want to go after we've tackled brain.
Why brain first, I guess, is the question.
The need is the most acute. Okay, millimeters count the most, and they have, relatively speaking, nothing helping them out when it comes to brain shift. So that's where the pull is from surgeons currently.
Okay.
It was also obvious from a commercialization standpoint where the navigation services were investing money and looking for acquisitions to get better at.
Gotcha.
Don't second guess the serial entrepreneur with the gyms. Just don't.
Thank you.
This is from a patent perspective. This is a very hot field and has been in the past few years. And I don't know about brain, but in spine, you guys are up against giants, right? Like the Medtronic and Maser and Stryker and Zimmer and NuVasive and all of them are working on this problem. And it's great that you have some IP. I would make sure that you're looking at all of these competitors' IP as well from a freedom to operate point of view, because what they're trying to claim, they're these claims that get super into algorithms and how you take the images and pixelate them and segment them, and it takes a specialist to be able to even understand what they have protected so far. And you don't want to get down the pipeline in your development too far before knowing what all these other players already have a handle on. And then also because there's 18 months from when you file something to when it gets published, you have to keep monitoring what they're doing, or you should be monitoring it, because you never know. There's probably a lot of parallel work going on simultaneously.
I don't know if you have anyone in Andrew's capacity on your team, but if not, I think you just made your first hire.
Now, Andrew, you're 100% right. We have done freedom to operate analysis based on what was available at the time. We continually look at the patents that are published by these competitors to see, to learn what they're up to and to make sure that, we're not going to impede. This is, we've kicked doors in the past few months over some things we've come across, and then found ways around them.
Great. Yeah, it's great. It's also litigious, right? It's an extremely litigious space. You have to be careful which doctors you work with and who they have relationships with. Make sure you write those NDAs very well. It's a minefield for sure.
It is. We have an attorney that's been working with us from the beginning that helped write and refine the patents. So I think we're comfortable with where we're at right now. But I agree with you. It's a constant check mark that needs to be made.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to sort of monitor. So you can have weekly reports of competitors within this field and have somebody have your attorney take a look at those claims.
That's something you can automate for them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to hear more about that at some point. Bobby Pack, you brought yourself back. What have you got?
I was just asking a question in, Rob brought up the comment about breast tissue, and in the breast tissue world, they rely on markers to tell where they're located. And so I was wondering if anybody's using nano-sized markers on the brain that could be removed, so that way you can do a pulse of fluoroscopy or something, so you can see, oh, here's where the markers are. They've moved this much, and re-register the model. But that would give it to you in three-dimensional space fairly quickly.
Yeah, what you're talking about is how some doctors track brain shift now. So, like I said, you open up the skull, they touch the, let's assume, and it brain changes shape immediately. Generally, it'll swell, and then it starts to lose fluid. If the anesthesiologists are really good with managing CO2 levels and things like that, they can minimize that. But a doctor will take little pieces of paper and puts them on the brain around where he wants to work, and he'll touch those, and then he zeroes out, so that becomes his reference point. And then an hour later, he'll go back and he'll touch this, and it says, oh, you're 3 millimeters moved. So they use that data to kind of collect a few reference points, so they can, and then they look up and they close their eyes and they imagine, all right, if the topology has moved like this, in a sense, what do I think is going on below? And then they move based on that information. So the idea is, instead of giving them a few bits of paper, I'm tracking 100,000 points, across this entire surface quantitatively, and recalculating the volume for them.
But it's all optical.
Yes.
That's an optical example. There's other attempts using sonography, and that is sensitive, say, to blood vessels in particular, and then the blood vessels have been mapped prior to the surgery. So if they're able to watch the blood vessels in 3D, they can know where the rest of the brain is. There's also sonograms coupled with some of these FEA simulations of the brain. So the coupling in that case is sonography. And then they use the sonography to correct the simulation, and the simulation tells people where the rest of the brain is. In that case, you're making contact with the brain. It's a real interruption. And again, it's, as Jeff said earlier, it's a little bit shadowy to have to rely on those. And then there are other technologies that are trying to use X-rays, even with the brain, even though it's soft tissue. And that's also gives you kind of a shadowy image that you can use to correct MRIs. Our 3D scanner is looking at the surface of the brain, which is the part that moves the most. And it's doing so at very high resolution. So we can inform an FEA simulation of the part that, the engineers would call it a boundary condition, the part that's moving the most, and we can give a real answer on what's going on there. And then from that knowledge, the simulation hopefully can make a really good guess as to what the rest of the brain is doing. So very different technologies. There are a lot of people trying to solve this problem.
Dwayne, you had something?
Yeah, I was just curious. So we spent a lot of time talking about the neuro portion of this, but then you had brought up the spinal portion and said that may be your first indication. And I was curious. So I know, they have those big like Medtronic O-arms or whatever that are in those spinal surgeries. Is this easier to use, or does this plug into that? How does that work? Because I'm just curious, because this is your, for your first indication seems to be, you mentioned spine.
Yeah. I haven't been to many spine surgeries yet, okay. But when I've observed it, it required the machine to be trundled up to the patient, arranged. It had to have a special assistant do that. They had to wait for that person to be available. And then they run it. They get their answer very quickly, however. So in a sense, for spine, the problems are solved in a way that they are not for the brain. The problem with spine is the radiation. We would like to monitor, since we're just optical, we would like to just have a machine that sits there and monitors the patient's anatomy in real time and update in real time so that there is no interruption to the procedure, no extra radiation.
Yeah, I'm curious because I think so. I've heard a few pitches in this space for spinal fusion, and I think that basically every one that I've seen, the use of those machines is quite low in spinal fusion surgery. They actually it's almost like they freehand it. And so I was curious to know, if this is something that you can plug in easily. It seems like it might be a good fit for surgeons, because the use of those arms, they just sit in the room and collect dust. I don't think that, at least that was the statistics I've seen, that a lot of orthopedic surgeons actually use that. And that's the cause for a lot of errors, when they're putting the pins and the rods in. So I think it's really interesting, as long as it's something easy to use, because the reason they don't use those arms is because, well, the complexity of them, they don't want to wait for them, right? So they feel they can just do it themselves. So it's really interesting. I just, food for thought, and I had some questions about it, so I appreciate it.
Thanks. We've heard the same feedback from surgeons. I just spent $800,000 on the system and we leave it in the hallway
Well,
because they don't like using it.
we hear that more about robotics than we do about fluoroscopy. The numbers are still not great in terms of the robotic procedures relative to freehanding it, like you mentioned.
That's why Zimmer's giving away for free.
Yeah, and so we would maybe like to be the eyes for such a robot, okay, so that there's a greater assurance of what's going on.
Cool.
Bob, you had something more to share?
Yeah, I shot a couple links in the webinar chat. So I work very closely with Dassault Systems. So they own Abacus for finite element analysis. And they have a living heart project where they're simulating the fluid and electromechanics of a heart. But more recently, they announced a living brain consortium. So they're working with academics, they're working with basically other companies and trying to create a model that will be able to simulate the brain and have it so it can become patient specific by morphing that geometry. And I think your scans could be the morph geometry. The models don't run nearly fast enough to be real time for what you're looking at, but they might be able to be used to derive where other geometry ends up if you knew what happened to the geometry. So if your surface moves by 10 millimeters, this is what we predict would probably happen everywhere else.
Thanks for that. I was not aware of that effort.
Yeah, the living heart is absolutely phenomenal. So that's what you check out first, because that would give you an indication of how awesome the brain model will be.
I put the links you shared in Slack under the what part. I put it in the wrong place. I meant to put it under our weekly call. I put it in what do you need, but I will put it in the weekly call area where it belongs.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to unclutter our screen a little bit. No offense to you people that I have just called clutter. And come back to my initial question for you, Jeff, which is, what are the main things that are next for you and that your next big challenges? You've said we've raised some money. We are bringing on new talent, presumably to solve some of the most pressing things. What can this collection of experts of virtually every discipline in the industry attack for you? How can we help?
Well, I'll say that, we're still figuring out our regulatory path. We are working with the company, but our needs keep evolving. So that is a moving target. For us, we have not put, we don't have a great understanding of what reimbursement looks like.
Oh, we have just
that is probably, that's a ways off for us right now before I think we've got the bandwidth to do it, but I'm starting to try and understand, what are, how those considerations might impact our clinical trials.
Everyone has the bandwidth for a little bit of Nick Anderson.
Ta-da!
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
All right, let's keep this real simple, Anderson.
I can't.
Not ready for the whole.
Yeah, I've been listening. I joined a little bit late, so I missed a few of the important points, but this one could be a really tricky reimbursement thing where normally I would say it's capital equipment to the hospital. It's the hospital's problem. If they want to buy it, they'll buy it. They'll write the check. You have a value analysis committee problem, not a
That was the next thing I was going to get to, is that the value analysis is probably the weak spot that we should start tackling sooner. I will mention that we are giving this scanner away. It is relatively inexpensive for us to
You
build.
have clearance?
What's that?
You have clearance already?
No. Not yet. But even once we're cleared, our business model is to give this scanner to the hospital and charge them a per use fee. So there's no risk on them. You don't use it, you don't pay for it.
That sounds like an expensive risk profile for you.
I don't think so.
I mean,
We want to be in market fast. We want to be everywhere. This costs less than $10,000 a delivered product to the hospital.
all right.
So we can afford to give it, there's 1,000, 1,200 hospitals that do these procedures.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 300 or 400 that do the 80% of them.
Well, of course, getting a sale is a clinical and operational and financial sale. So I don't know how intense the operational / training or how you'd support that per physician who might use the equipment. So that seems a bit cumbersome to me, but you may have figured that out already.
In a perfect world, we make it, so it's
So easy to use. You turn it on and it's probably
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. It updates, and so that's what we're working on. When we say our clinical trial stopped, we put our efforts into just making this as seamless as possible. We have work to do, but we're definitely headed in that direction. This should just plug in and work and do its thing and update the image. The doctor, can decide when he wants to update, hits a foot pedal, it presses a button, it does a scan, and he goes back on with his work. By attaching it to the microscope, that's workflow. The surgeon is looking through that thing, for hours on end doing his procedure. So it just plugs right on to his tool of choice.
I brought Orcas onto the line because this sounds like a lot of connected wireless cloud data collection-y stuff, and that's what you like to play in. What kind of thoughts have you got to offer for Jeff?
Yeah, no, I've had the pleasure of chatting with Jeff in the past, and
Yeah.
the cool product that you guys are working on. I'd love to hear more about the entrepreneurship piece of this, because I always find it interesting. I mean, having been an entrepreneur in such different type of industries, what are you finding to be the differences and the challenges that maybe you weren't expecting? I mean, it sounds, earlier on you said that you were afraid of the space prior to being inside it, and so it made it almost sound like now that you're in it, you realize it's not so different than others. But I just love to hear about your thoughts on that.
Before you do, Jeff, I'm wondering if Natalia finally asked you to go out into the acoustic box in the backyard for your calls.
Different room, yeah.
Where are you?
Different room, living room.
Well, you must have a cavernous house.
Open, call it open
If
floor
it
plan.
weren't so COVID-y, I think you should have a party and we all come over to your place.
Come on over. Let's do it.
If it weren't so COVID-y and you didn't live in Florida.
Everybody wear a mask. Anyway.
Anyway, sorry.
So to answer your question,
Thanks.
I just knew there was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know. Out of the gate, wasn't really sure where I was going to find all those answers. We went through, so our first year, really we spent, talking to the occasional doctor we could find, VCs and investors to find out, what would make us investable. We talked to a couple of people at the hospitals. We applied to, 5 or 6 different accelerators. We didn't get into any of them the first year, but we kind of learned what was missing. The next year we applied to the same 5 or 6 and we got into every one of them. And so we spent a year just going through program. We did the National Science Foundation's I-Core program, which forced us to go talk to hospitalists and surgeons for customer discovery. That's where I first heard about health value economics and reimbursement and regulatory processes, the hospital purchasing process. Initially, we thought we were going to sell this for 150 grand into the hospital. But everybody we met was like, it's so cheap for you to build, give it to them. You make your money back in a week. And you remove all the barriers to purchase. You get rid of the purchasing cycles and things like that. And that was one of the most attractive things to investors from that point on. Hearing a SaaS model just really turned everybody on. And I think that was one of the big things that kind of helped us turn the page from wanting to be raising money, but not, to successfully getting, people in the door. And I talked to a couple of like B and C series investors, and they kind of painted the long game for me. These are the steps you're going to make, and these are the, at which point, you get angel investors, and then what you need to do to get your Series A, and then to B. And we had really good feedback. Like every surgeon we talked to, almost without exception, would be like, that's amazing. That is the biggest problem in brain surgery. If you can solve that, I'll work with you. I'll do trials. And when I said earlier, we got ahead of ourselves talking to surgeons, I'm not kidding. We got a line of surgeons.
Oh. You're muted, Joe.
And I think Jeff's frozen.
Yep.
Well, that's unfortunate. Let's get Jeff 2 on just in case.
That's why you brought a replacement.
That's right. We need a replacement Jeff for just such an occasion. Alternatively, we could totally just listen to John Ekberg if he stops moving his camera around. What are you doing?
My phone holder is falling. You'll be surprised to know I wasn't Zoom. Oops. I wasn't Zoom capable until like an hour ago. My life has been so cloistered. How are you, Joe? This is an interesting discussion. And back to the question of what people might offer that he hasn't foreseen is always, trying to understand things you don't know is to me always a challenging question of almost any device or approach.
Well, I brought you on camera not only to see if you actually could figure out how to do it, and not only because you amuse me greatly, but I thought you might actually know a thing or two that you could share, something about your journalist background and your public relations. How early should he be telling a story? How far along do you, go, and different stages? Any thoughts on that to share?
Yeah, you can't. I don't think you can front load those benefits soon enough. And I think the one point is who is going to be the customer, and the value analysis team is probably the customer. So figuring out ways to show the economies of this approach is going to be, I think, paramount there. But like you said, my role basically has been to interact with the public, media, and whatnot. And nobody ever thinks about how they are going to tell the story to the industry until the last thing. And that's probably the first thing they should be piecing together at the same time they're attempting to bring this to regulatory authorities. Does that sound like you know what I'm talking about?
More or less. I think your casual countenance undermines your vast intellect.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Aaron/Jeff 2. Well, here's Jeff 1.
I'm glad I had a backup here. I'm going to blame that on the hurricane. Take my internet out for a minute. I'm connected through my phone now. So I hope this is working okay.
I wondered, you're in Austin, you said? Pardon me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the weather here is beautiful. We're far enough from the hurricane. It's not a hurricane.
I wanted to ask, Mark Fine was asking, how much did you guys raise?
Just over $3 million.
And you feel that you, at your current burn rate, you're good for?
At our current burn rate, we're good through the end of next year. That burn rate is going to grow.
This takes into account the $1 million you're paying me for this hour, or no?
September next year. By that time, we'll have proven a few things. We'll have done some more studies. We'll have, we have some other capabilities that we didn't even address in today's chat that we want to validate, that open up literally 22 times the size of the market that our current product works on.
Yeah, I think your phone broke out about around the part where I talked about my compensation, but we could talk about that later.
Yeah, okay.
John was telling us that he feels as though there's not too early a point at which you begin to tell this story to industry, and you've certainly had a number of conversations with surgeons. How actively are you telling your story to potential strategics and folks like that?
We have visited with many of them at some of the trade shows in person when they were going on.
Yeah.
We are part of Medtronic, has an external research program. So I think we're one of less than 40 companies worldwide that are part of that program. They gave us this stealth station, and they meet with us regularly to help guide our interaction with the machine and help us make it work.
So you see that as like the equivalent of a board meeting, like you're meeting with Medtronic today, so we better be buttoned up, or is it more of a, oh, thank goodness that the team is coming and helping us guide our next step? A little of both?
So we have formal meetings set up quarterly or every 6 months during this program. We have a monthly meeting with their people that are in charge of the stealth station. For them, that is more of a casual, what are you going on? What's going on? What do you need help with? Show me what you got. And that's going really well. And that is, part of the reason that we're adjusting our product release schedule is to be based on some of the encouragement we get from them on, that by itself is really useful. That by itself really solves the problem. So the little things that we thought were going to be, stepping stones towards delivering this full solution for BrainShift before we had a commercializable product, we're being told differently. You know what? When you guys have that working, that has value. So it becomes more exciting and interesting. We had some conversations with some robotics companies. They move very well, but when we talked about brain surgery, and I told you how the surgeon builds up all of these sensory ways to evaluate where they are in the brain. When you go to a robot, they lose that connection to the brain. So while the robot moves much better, the surgeon's instinct can be negated by operating at a distance. So our goal is to put this scanner on the tip of the robot. And at that point, the surgeon gets kind of the robot close, and now he's got super accurate information. The robot knows exactly where it is relative to the targeted tissue. So we talked about global to local. Being on the tip of that robot or in the surgeon's hand is about as local as you can get.
I brought fan favorite Andre Domino on the call, not only because,
hey, Chad,
because he amuses, and we wanted to see what tie he's wearing today.
Very plain.
But Andre, since you make stuff, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, or if Jeff's already identified where his device would be manufactured, if there are any things, and I could bring Rick on for design for manufacturability and the like. Any thoughts on that?
No, just as I was listening, it was very, very interesting. Just questions regarding the electronic side, which we specialize in. Have you considered all of the standard regulatory requirements regarding 60601 certifications and so forth?
We have considered them. We're still rebuilding prototypes, redesigning for different use cases. The one that you see on this, that's built to look at the brain. The one that looks at the spine might have a slightly different embodiment. All the IP is the same, whether it's in this or in a surgical microscope or in an endoscope, ultimately where we want to put it. So we haven't settled enough on enough of our parts that we've actually begun any of that testing, but we're
Yeah.
aware.
Well, and I think my comment was more related to the fact of in the design process, it's better to look at all the PCBs and all the components and so forth with a view towards 60601 and 60601-2 because of the fact that, you don't want to have to back into the certification later on. And that's kind of something that, from the beginning, we always look at when we look at the electronic side of any development.
Thank you. To be honest, I'm not in charge of that. I know we're on top of, we're aware of it. If Aaron was on the line, he's probably got a little more in that direction, but we've got a hardware guy who's kind of tasked with understanding those things. I'm not going to become an expert in the majority of these areas. I just know that I got to have somebody that is responsible for them. And ultimately we will reach out. Like, we're not going to do all that testing in-house.
Sure.
So at some point, probably within the next 6 months, our goal is to have a product, that we can submit for approval, at least be far enough down the line, manufacturing and parts wise, to do that sometime Q2 of next year.
Jeff, I applaud you. I've gotten through life with the adage, I know a guy.
I know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Got a guy. I'm from Brooklyn. His name is Bruno.
Oh, I thought you just said you're from Brooklyn.
I am.
I'm from Brooklyn. Did we cover this?
I'm from Brooklyn.
Oh my God.
Too? You're in
So you guys know Bruno.
Where you were?
No, Bensonhurst.
And Jeff?
Flatbush. Oh, well, Ocean Avenue with Flatbush.
Sure.
Okay, Bay Ridge.
All right. We got it covered.
76th and 3rd. And Peter Harris, you're from Brooklyn as well, right?
South of Brooklyn, originally, South Africa.
Oh, right, South Africa. I knew I recognized the accent. I brought Mr. Harris on because, like you, he is an entrepreneur who worked in the field of surgery, and I wonder if you have something that, I know that Jeff is a multifaceted serial entrepreneur, but perhaps as a medical device guy, there's an entrepreneurial nugget, or God, I wish I knew that back then, what I know now, that you might share with
Actually, you're bringing me back on is timely, because I have a question for Jeff. But before I ask that question, Jeff, just full disclosure, Joe, Jeff and I had a chat the other day, and we talked about some of the stuff they're doing. So I know a little about what the discussion was about.
I watched Peter's talk a couple of weeks ago is how we met.
Yeah, through
it's working, folks. It's working.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, very much so. So anyway, Jeff, I've been learning a lot more in addition to what I learned from you the other day. And now I have a question, just circling back to the spinal column and spinal tissue application. The embodiment of your scanner as it currently is, or as it would be in the first clinical units, and being located physically close to the tip of the robotic end effect, surgical end effector, does it require more access, a bigger opening in the spinal, in the vertebra bony tissue to access the spinal column to do the positioning and registration measurements? Or would it be small enough that the surgical opening in the vertebra does not have to be larger than it would have been otherwise?
Fair question, something we wonder about. So this unit here is built for the brain, not the spine, or we would have a different model that would go onto a robot. We believe we can build this into an endoscope, so into like a 5 or 6 millimeter endoscope. So it could be useful for minimally invasive procedures.
But I'm wondering, considering that your sensor is at the end of the day, it's a visible light optical sensor. If you need some minimum standoff distance between the receiving element between the sensing element of your sensor and the target tissue, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 millimeters, so that it, for example, has enough standoff distance for it to do its optical thing, number one, and number two, so that it doesn't get gunked up with blood and other body tissue.
Joe, you might want to bring Aaron back on if you want like a real technical answer to this question. But we would build a unit for each use case. For the brain, we have this one. For colorectal products, we would have an endoscope. And we'd have to find out what they are. So Aaron's here. You want to address that, Aaron?
Yeah, we would have different embodiments. The standoff distance for an endoscope would be millimeters. But for the brain scanner, we're keeping the standoff distance similar to that used on the microscope itself, which is something like 8 to 18 inches. So it depends on the application. But you can think of it in terms of if a camera can focus on it, then that's the standoff distance. So an endoscope has a typical working distance already, and we would use that.
Peter, are you satisfied?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. We are nearing the hour-and-a-half mark, which is the high water mark for these. Jeff, this is your time. How would you like to use our closing minutes with the group?
Yeah, I think I've said everything I need to say about kind of what we're working on. This group has been great. I've talked to a number of people in this group already. Most of them know we're early, we're working. I've gotten a lot of great advice from people in this group. I've kind of pointed out the next few things that we're working on, and I fully intend to harvest intelligence from the group going forward.
I think I shared with you recently, and everyone has access, every MDG premium member has access to the directory of everyone. So you can sort by their functional expertise, click through to their LinkedIn profiles, their email addresses are there and the like. So that'll give you a little hand too. And if somehow something that you need is not on that list, ask us. Put it in the what do you need. You mentioned the jobs. Do you have job descriptions on a website or someplace?
I do. I want to say I've already put them in the MDG group, but I'll double check.
Okay. But the actual job descriptions so that we can socialize? Okay.
Yeah, I'll double check.
Do it again. Just to be safe. Good. Well, I had fun.
Likewise. It was not as painful as I thought.
You expected pain?
Oh, it's always a little nerve-wracking going into an hour conversation that I feel unprepared for. So
were you unprepared to answer things that you do?
No, you asked me to talk about things I know. So you told me to calm down, and I did. So it was fun.
Are there some things about which you're a little less well-versed that you'd like to take a stab at now? Do you know much about salsa dancing that you could tell us?
Salsa dancing, no, not my area of expertise. If you want to talk about, gun defenses and things like that, we can talk about that. We can talk about training. That's what we taught the military. Somebody pulls a gun on you, how do you take it away and beat them with it? That's
You're ex-military?
No, I was a combatives trainer, chief combatives officer for the Army for a couple of years, and we taught weapon defenses.
You asked just the right question and you get answers you do not expect. Carrie Mellon wants to know if you can tell her anything about horses.
My wife can tell you everything about horses. I can tell you that they're like eggs on legs. They break all the time. They become pets once you can't ride them anymore.
And if I'm not mistaken, Carrie, you're an equestrian. So if you want to get in touch with Mrs. Levine, I'm sure that Jeff can arrange that.
Yeah, we're Esoteric Farm, and you can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to make a connection.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you for this.
Thank you, Joe. This was fun, and thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
And I hope that we've kicked up a few things that you might not have considered earlier that are now on your very considerable to-do list.
Yes, my list has grown as a result of this conversation.
Next week's guest star is Rob Packard. He's going to talk about remote auditing. So, I'll be here. I won't understand most of what he says, but I enjoy him. So there's that. See everyone next week, and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.